posted 2.7% of global foreign exchange reserves in 2022. This is good news for China, but bad news for Russia, since, like its situation in India, it's now left with huge cash reserves of a currency that only a very small amount of global trade has undertaken. At least China's more sophisticated economy is able to offer Russia more of the goods and services. Still yuan reserves, but it can't provide everything. Still, in Russia with significant yuan reserves, it cannot do much with. But the bigger picture overall is one where Russia's effectively forced to sell its energy for two currencies that the vast majority of the world doesn't do business with, meaning that the longer Russia is left under sanctions, the more dependent it becomes on the China. Currencies it has left and significant reserves, and nobody else wants it. China's political support is likewise. Russia announced its no-limits partnership. China was quick to correct the record in order to not offend the West, where it has significant investments. To date, Chinese support has been tepid at best, with the nation calling for equal, equitable peace for both sides. What exactly that entails remains ambiguous, with China careful to word its 12-point peace plan in a way that leaves it completely unclear as to how to use a valid resolution to the war in Ukraine. In point number one, China calls for both parties to observe the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of all countries. But this peace plan was presented after Russia annexed eastern Ukraine. So, does China support returning Ukrainian sovereignty to the annexed provinces, or does it support Russian claims to sovereignty? Nobody but the Chinese know, leaving their position pleasantly ambiguous to their own benefit and to the detriment of Russia. With most of the world not recognizing its annexation of Ukrainian territory, Russia needs a significant willpower to recognize its claims, or it will lose them entirely. But as the world becomes increasingly polarized between liberal democracies and authoritarian dictatorships, why would China not fully embrace a like-minded authoritarian state? Why, in reality, does China want Russia to lose the war in Ukraine? It all comes down to what China needs in order to continue prospering and pursue its ultimate goal of dethroning the U.S. as the sole global superpower. And Russia has everything China needs to accomplish this. Relations between the two states have varied wildly from warm friendship during the first part of the Cold War to mutual distrust and even outright armistice. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia is still the big boy on the block as China the junior partner, but the Chinese dragon has completely overtaken the affairs, with China now more frequent not just economically, but politically and militarily as well. Russia's only remaining advantage over China is its nuclear, but with the state of the military on full display in Ukraine, there are serious questions as to the efficacy of arsenal and nuclear combatant in the U.S. China's working to close that gap too, with massive investment in nuclear weapons in recent years, much to the world's detriment. China has a long memory of its treatment of a junior partner by the Soviet Union superpower, and continued by Russia until recently. It also remembers the territory stolen from it by the Russian Empire in 1858, under a set of humiliating treaties forced upon the Qing dynasty by the Russians. Russian Manchuria now includes the Amur Oblast and the southern half of the Khabarovsk Krai. It's not just national pride at stake, though, as Russian Manchuria happens to not just be strategically important, but also rich in energy resources and, most importantly, water. With China experiencing significant droughts, water shortages have put huge pressure on the nation, and the territory stolen from it by the Russian Empire happens to have two of the resources it needs most today. Russian Manchuria is only the tip of Chinese ambitions, though, because the greater prize is the entire Russian Far East. The RFE contains massive quantities of energy and other resources that remain largely unexplored and untapped. It is exactly these resources China is eyeing hungrily. Not only would it dramatically bolster the Chinese economy, but having access to those energy stockpiles would create a secure overland energy supply route directly to China. This is of significant concern when today China faces the very real prospect of having the U.S. Navy completely blockade its sea-based trade, which accounts for approximately 60% of its energy imports. Without the ability to challenge the U.S. Navy far from its own shores, having a vast supply of energy delivered via secure land routes would suddenly give China a lot of freedom to pursue some of the aggressive foreign policy goals that the United States currently keeps in check, such as invading and annexing Taiwan. For its part, Russia has not helped Chinese ambitions in the region much. In 2014, Russia launched its Arctic Development Plan and did not include any Chinese involvement, nor did they make any mention of plans to prioritize Chinese energy needs. That's all changed as Russia has turned to China to finance significant infrastructure and energy exploration in the region. For the Russian political elite in Moscow, the situation is increasingly alarming. Not only are Russia's energy resources in its most far-flung region being financed by the Chinese, but China's own investments into the Russian Far East overall vastly outstrip its investments by the Russian federal government. Immigration, both legal and illegal, is creating a population that is increasingly more Chinese than Russian. In 20 to 30 years, it's feared that there will be more ethnic Chinese in the RFE than Russians, a concerning situation given that 113 million Chinese are sitting right across the border in neighboring Chinese provinces. Tensions between local Russians and Chinese populations are already nearing a boiling point. There's a deep resentment over the growing crowds of Chinese tourists who are said to be rude and patronize only Chinese businesses. In 2019, tensions came to a fever pitch over a Chinese-owned bottling plant on Lake Baikal, which is the world's deepest lake with 20% of the global freshwater supply. This Chinese plant would not only block local access to the water supply, but ship that water to China, where it's desperately needed. The Russian outrage was so pronounced that plans to build the plant were deemed illegal in Russian court. China's not done much to ease tensions, and in fact seems to have signaled intentions to eventually retake Russian Manchuria. Recently, Beijing approved the creation of official maps, which show the territories surrendered under the Ming Dynasty under Chinese control, and with their old Chinese names. The statement was clear: China wants what Russia has. And this is why China needs Russia to lose this war. And the worse it loses, the better. Russia's unlikely to simply allow demographics to shift ownership of the RFE from itself to China, even as a growing Chinese population creates an opportunity for an independence movement or an annexation by China. It is ironically exactly how Russia claims justification for invading Ukraine: the protection of Russian speakers in eastern Ukraine. In another decade or two, China will have this exact same justification to move to annex the RFE, a region that's not just increasingly ethnically Chinese, but financially too. While China could absolutely defeat Russia in a conventional war, Russia's unlikely to let the RFE go piecemeal and could resort to lethal weapons to defend its territory. This is where a crippling loss in Ukraine would be to China's advantage, and such a loss would likely come with significant political upheaval, exactly the type of chaos China could use to make a move on the RFE, consolidating its hold before a fractured Russian state would probably react. In the end, it'd be a fitting fate for Russia to have its own territory annexed by a belligerent neighbor, but it would be a significant setback for the liberal world order, which has relied on the U.S. Navy's ability to control Chinese trade to keep its worst ambitions in check. The date is July 2019, and rumors of a military buildup of Chinese forces across the strait from Taiwan began to leak to the international press. As the 4th of July is celebrated here at home, thousands of miles away, Taiwan begins to move their command and control functions into hardened, nuclear-proof underground facilities. F-16s and other strike aircraft are moved into mountain bases. Anti-dummy missile batteries and anti-aircraft platforms are set up around the island of Taiwan. August rolls around, and by now it's clear to the world that China is indeed massing what looks like an invasion force on its side of the Taiwan Strait. Though the Chinese leader Xi Jinping reassures the world that he's only interested in a peaceful reunification of Taiwan and the mainland, the American military has put in DEFCON 3, which signals the Air Force to be ready to mobilize for a potential nuclear conflict in just 15 minutes. As September comes, the Chinese military has begun commandeering civilian ships in order to help move its 1 million man strong invasion force across the channel. The Chinese military lacks the amphibious capability to move more than 100,000 troops at a time, but in order to face 100,000 Taiwanese defenders and their 2 million reservists, the People's Liberation Army will need every available ship it can get its hands on, no matter how big or small. Across the strait, Taiwan has begun littering the only 13 beaches that an invasion force could be landed on with mines, razor wire, and other horrific surprises. The U.S. Pacific Fleet is fully mobilized by now, and the United States is at DEFCON 2. All military leave is canceled. Marines board transports as they head for bases in Australia, Japan, and Guam. PACOM's carrier groups disperse 1,000 miles offshore from Taiwan, careful to make sure it did not stray too deep into the net of ballistic missile coverage that China used to threaten American naval vessels. There's no hiding China's intentions now. An invasion of Taiwan is coming, and the entire world knows it. Taiwanese troops, supplemented by a few thousand rapid response American forces, dig in for what will be the largest amphibious assault in history. The date is October 3rd, 2019. The seas between Taiwan and China are finally calm again, presenting a narrow 4-week opportunity for an amphibious assault that only recurs briefly one other time of the year in May. Chinese troops are rushed to wave transports. The lucky ones board military amphibious landing craft, while the unlucky ones must make the treacherous crossing on civilian boats with little if any protection. Overhead, hundreds of missiles fly out over the strait, slamming into radar, communications, and control nodes all over the island. Airfields are cratered. Civilian power plants are destroyed. Chinese jets scream overhead en route to strike at Taiwanese tanks and artillery pieces, shortly after followed by Chinese bombers. Yet the Taiwanese Air Force has long been redeployed to underground facilities, and American-made F-16s flown by Taiwanese pilots rise up to meet the incoming Chinese planes. 1,000 miles away, U.S. carrier battle groups are given the green light to advance to forward positions just off the Taiwan coast, bringing a significant portion of America's naval air power. They alone are more than a match for the Chinese Air Force. Yet as they steam ahead, a rain of ballistic